I'm your host, Beams, and today I'm joined by Zack, co-founder of Coordinape, a platform for decentralized compensation. Welcome, Zack.
Thanks, Beams. It's great to join you.
And so just to begin, I would love to hear a little bit about how and why you got into Web3. So a TLDR about your journey.
TLDR, my journey to Web3. I'd say I'm fairly new to the space. I really discovered Web3 because of my connection with my co-founders, Trake and Zem. Trake and I had worked together many years ago in another life on a previous project, and reconnected when he was at the core team at Yearn, and sort of discovered DAOs and really just went down the rabbit hole head first. My previous, before I was working at a consultancy that I co-founded called Converge. And Converge was focused on designing and launching networks for social and environmental impact. So how I would describe it now is we were really helping to create kind of IRL DAOs to address social and environmental problems. Like, how do you steward 500,000 acres of redwoods, right? How do you protect migrant rights across borders? These kind of things that really need a systemic approach. And so we bring together corporate and political and activist leaders and really build them into a network that could look at leverage points across their system and find ways to collaborate together. And so we did that mainly through bringing together folks to 4-day deep dive convenings, which was really an incredible experience, and had a lot of impact and still do. Converge is still doing amazing work out in the world, but tough to scale. Right? It's really hard to get a bunch of busy people to block out time and all come together in person. And so when I saw DAOs, I really saw it as this critical piece of infrastructure to start collaborating globally the way we're going to need to in the next, in the coming decades, as we really get into the deep white water of the Anthropocene and have some pretty wicked global challenges to navigate together. That's how I sort of came to Web3. It was all just hype on DAOs and the potential for collaborative infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, that's also what sparked my interest in terms of DAOs, especially working in the nonprofit or NGO sector, and just seeing ways in which human coordination could be much more effective, but also a lack of dependency on the industrial complex, especially when it comes to funding models, was just very inspiring. But you said that you were first interested in DAOs, that's kind of what sparked your interest, and then you went down the rabbit hole of that. Can you take me a little bit through that rabbit hole journey, and also just maybe highlighting your first experiences or curiosities in entering that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was lucky in that I kind of had someone to guide me, or I kind of had an entry point. Because Trake was working at Yearn, and one of the things that we were thinking about at Yearn at the time was this is obviously a very technical, pseudonymous, async kind of projects that everyone's working on. And yet what we know, both from experience and especially from the research, is that people collaborate on relationships, not on issues. And so how could we start to build more connection and coherence among the DAO? And so, started helping out a little bit at Yearn, just doing, things like community calls and sort of how do you bring people together? And it was soon after that we saw this opportunity at Yearn to do decentralized payments. Essentially, there were a lot of contributors that were coming and helping out in all sorts of ways, and they had to apply to a grant to get paid for the work that they were doing. And you had some people applying for grants that, they asked for too much or maybe asked for too little. There were some people that were doing work that didn't know there was a grant program. And then there was a grant committee whose making these subjective judgments and sort of like, well, why are we on the grant committee, right? We were just kind of here first. And so there were a lot of issues with that. And at Converge, the way that we did compensation is we never had anyone on payroll. We just, whoever worked on a project, we would then invoice a client and put the money in the middle of the table and talk about, like, well, who should get what? What do you think you should get? And that's how we ran and still do, even as we scaled to more people. And so I was thinking about that model and like, how could we translate that to Web3? And so that was sort of one of the inspirations of Coordinape. It's like, well, why don't we just let people pay each other according to the value that they've seen people bring? And so we built that prototype for Yearn, and then kind of in short order, a bunch of other DAOs were like, we have that same problem. Can we try it too? And it just sort of grew from there.
Cool. We'll definitely get to Coordinape in a hot second. But so what you said though is that you started off with like community calls, and then you were able to kind of leverage the experience that you had at Converge to kind of help develop a template for a problem in regards to compensation or the inefficiency within the grants process. So how were you able, like, whether it was from the community calls or developing a working group or a project, like how do you think that you were able to kind of leverage the skill sets or experience that you had in order to kind of fulfill those particular tasks? So like maybe beginning with like a community call, right? Like can you describe your like first experience with a community call, and like one where you were able to kind of leverage, you know, the experience that you had at Converge or maybe previously, but like you are in a new environment. So like what was that like? Like how did you see yourself kind of improving, doing a similar thing that you might do in a different ecosystem or environment, but different, you know, because it's on Discord or it's on Twitter and different
Yeah.
markets, so.
I mean, I was really lucky that the focus of our work at Converge was how do you bring people together to build relationship and shared context to get things done, you know, which is like a DAO. And it was also, you know, participants in the networks we built at Converge had a day job and they were super busy. That's why they were part of this network, is because they were trying to get something done in the context of a bigger system, which their organization was a part of. And so how to design experiences and bring people together in a way that is both like deeply relational so that they're building trust, but also is pragmatic and practical so that they're getting stuff done, is something that I've been practicing for a long time. And in addition, networks, you know, are sort of a fundamentally different structure, and they don't have a top-down way of doing things. There's no CEO or VP saying, here's the KPIs that we're trying to hit and go do it. So I had a lot of experience working in this sort of more ambiguous organizational system. So for me, it actually felt pretty familiar to come in to a bunch of folks who were trying to collaborate together, and we're trying to figure out the best ways to do that and bring a lot of just what we had learned at Converge around, you know, how do you create, like I said, connection and coherence amongst groups. And yeah, so I was lucky, I guess, in that my previous skill set really poured it over well. And I think also in Web3, I mean, I'm always the least technical person on any call or group that I'm a part of. I've never written a line of code in my life, and I don't think I ever will. And so that was sort of a deficiency. A deficiency is the wrong word, you know. But there's obviously like a very technical orientation to Web3, especially if you look at like the roots of it. You know, the first DAO was this, like, it really was trying to be a decentralized autonomous organization. You know, like how can we get rid of the pesky humans and really create an organization run by code? And so I still think some of that idea kind of permeates things. You know, it's like how can how can code and software make things better. And I think what we're learning, or maybe remembering in Web3, is that there's always a human at the other end of things. This like very irrational and messy emotional creature who's trying to collaborate and get things done. And so I feel like I was lucky in the sense that I had already spent a lot of time thinking about how humans collaborate, and so I could bring that perspective to the more sort of technical orientation that people have, when working online.
Yeah. So, just talking about getting things done, some of the kind of obstacles within DAOs are the getting things done because everything is so decentralized, right? And I think that we began with this idea that like it's completely like permissionless, which maybe some have assumed also leaderless, but we also recognize, with the implementation of stewards and project managers, that there needs to be somewhat of a plan in order for things to get done, and also an idea of what people can contribute to in order to get those things done. And so I wanted to kind of talk about your early days in kind of formulating the working groups for this idea, or the template that you created at Yearn, which would then eventually be Coordinape, or created the foundations for Coordinape. Because like when I first entered a DAO, like I've been lucky enough to be, of course, in Bankless DAO, which was like completely like organized because I came late enough, and it was filled with project managers. And so they had all their templates and stuff. And then, when I entered, different nascent DAOs, for example, it was just like nobody really wanted to say or tell anybody like what to do, but the things needed to be done. And so then my question was always like, why don't we just leverage the existing principles that we had in like project management, you know what I mean, that we could just apply to these things? And so like, why do you think that there's this like disconnect of kind of applying the learnings or, experiences in like knowing how to get the things done, but then like when entering the DAO space, like we tend to forget about it as if it is like, contradictory to this ethos of decentralization?
Yeah, it's a really pretty fascinating dynamic. I feel like I think that a lot of the reason that people are drawn to DAOs and Web3 are because they just see like how hopelessly busted a lot of the institutions are, that are operating. It's pretty clear that corporate capitalism is like not not the best system. Um, it's pretty clear that governments are not able to respond, right, to the shifting context and how fast things are sort of happening. And you can sort of look at every institution and say that, like, education is kind of busted, right? Healthcare is kind of busted, all these things. And so I think that there's a real attraction in Web3 to, I call it like throw a better party, right? Let's just focus on like how could things be better and not fight against these old institutions or, fight to make things better. Like we can just go over here and make them better. But in that process, I think that there's still a lot of, instead of moving toward what we want, there is a lot of like still rejection of what we don't want. And so I think almost subconsciously, it was kind of like corporations are messed up, the way that they work and the bureaucracy and all this stuff. Like we don't want any of that. And so we're going to build it all new, which is of course crazy, right? We've got like hundreds of years of really, really valuable learning from like how humans can collaborate to get things done, from management science and from corporations. And so I think that rejection is still a little bit of a holdover. And I think it's going to be tempered really quickly. I think that one of the big trends that we'll see is, corporations will look more like DAOs and DAOs will look more like corporations. There's going to be sort of a spectrum of decentralization that happens as people sort of figure out like how do we do, how do squads or pods kind of fit in together to get things done in a larger whole without all of the middle management. The sweet spot for DAOs when we have the sort of speed and innovation of a bunch of little teams that are able to try things and iterate quickly, but are also part of some larger coherent strategy. And that's really like the challenge that, I spent a lot of time as a corporate consultant, and this is the challenge everyone's trying to figure out. Like, hat tip to Owaki, to Kevin Owaki, like it's all coordination. It always has been. But that's where I think that disconnect comes from, and sort of the rejection of hierarchy, and recognizing that like bosses and managers just kind of sucks. But it's also crazy to reject hierarchy, because you need a leader. You can't have everyone deciding which way to go. So the way that we talk about that is thinking about, hierarchies are great, and we're huge believers in hierarchies, but let's think of them not as role based, but as context based. So, the leader is the one who knows what to do next. How do we make these hierarchies fluid so that when, there's a decision about the code base that we're going to use, my opinion is irrelevant, and I don't get to participate in any of those decisions, and for good reason, right? But where are the places where, I have insight, and like I'll step up and lead this bit. And that's true in DAOs and in all the best teams, whatever kind of organization they're in. They have this kind of fluid hierarchy, and not just like I'm the VP and I have seniority, so now all of a sudden my decisions carry weight when they shouldn't.
And so what did you end up finding was the happy medium for working in the working group and at Yearn on this compensation solution? Because if like DAOs are going to be like corporations, and like corporations could be like DAOs, and we need to implement some of the learnings, like how did you get the shit done?
Well, I mean, I think it was just an example of like there was a clear need, and then we came with an idea and implemented it, and then it turned out to meet that need. This is like, I think, one of the big differences in a DAO versus a corporation. If it was a corporation, then I would have had to go to my boss, who had to go to their boss, and somehow get approval and get budget and get buy-in from other departments to use this thing or whatever. And instead, we just went and built it, and we're like, here, try this. And everyone's like, okay, we'll try it. It was that sort of orientation to, iterate quickly and try stuff. And I guess I want to clarify that it's like, I don't think that corporations are going to become DAOs and vice versa. I just think that there's a sort of, large spectrum of centralization and decentralization and how people are going to organize to work. There's obviously a lot of so-called companies who operate very much like DAOs. And, there's a lot of famous examples of those from, reinventing organizations and places like that. And co-ops, have been around for a really long time. And so, hopefully we're just learning from those models as we adapt them to this world of Web3, which is, the blockchain and tokens really are a way to operationalize a lot of these models, to really distribute value and ownership in a different way than we were able to before.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is like corporations can definitely take DAO like features. But what I'm really curious about is whether or not if the corporate culture is actually going to be the biggest obstacle towards that. And so like an example would be like, what I really love about DAOs is that, your output is like transparent. So it's like, I am going to do this. And then when you do this, then you get compensated for that. And everybody can see, and like your reputation is built based on your output, right? Whereas in like a lot of industries in the corporate world, people didn't necessarily get to where they are because of what they've accomplished, right? Managers, for example, working in government, I've seen that tons of times, and so then like as sexy and as like inspiring as that is that like there's a whole world that is dependent on inefficiencies, right? And mostly leans on, rather than output, more on like relationship building, which some would call office politics, right? And so it's like what I found the biggest kind of obstacle for myself was there was a lot of unlearning when entering the DAO space, right? Because like I kind of entered it like, and it's worked to my advantage just to kind of see where I'm going is that like this is the value that I bring and this is the value that I get. And so the value is mostly based on like output, and then like the friendships that I made and things like that were a bonus, right? And even like when we produce work collectively, in the corporate world, like we strive for perfection, whereas in the DAO ecosystem, like we kind of allow ourselves the opportunity to grow or to even try the things out, and because like it's not as um, impactful if we don't write a perfect article for our newsletters. You know what I mean? Like we're allowing that buffer to learn because we're still saying that it's like it's all new. This is like a new human coordination kind of issue, and so I'm just like curious as to because the idea of like change management isn't new. There's industries and like consultants based on that you have to pay $5,000 to get a certificate to call yourself a consultant around that. But like in the gist of it is that like how do we develop value based on output that isn't dehumanizing, right? And this is also comes into the compensation, because my ideas were always like, okay, like if the person who manages the Discord, will they get the same compensation as the person that like has built the Discord? Like how do we develop, like our examples are like developers are high in demand, but like actually the people on the front lines are these community managers as well, but like where is their value within our ecosystem, right? And so I think that the value of work in DAOs have not really like evolved just as yet, because I think we're still holding on to the builder wins first kind of thing, right? And I think that that's where all of these like human coordinations and communication aspects and things like that are kind of thought of as like second, not like second nature, but like not as prioritized as the like we must build the things. And this is why we have like an abundance of tools to fix communication issues or coordination issues or things like that. We leverage on technology when we could really be leveraging on our like community building practices. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that in terms of like the value of the human side of DAOs.
I mean, I'm a huge proponent of the value and human side of DAOs. I think that's why DAOs are going to only grow. It's because that's what people are attracted to. It is, regardless, it is more humanizing to work in what's functionally a community, especially one that you can quickly gain access and ownership to. And the other really powerful thing about DAOs is that you don't have to do change management. There's a real power in working from this blank slate of people coming together and sort of building the culture from the ground up, as opposed to almost any company you get to. There's already sort of a deep cultural kind of ruts built. And that's also why almost all change management doesn't work. I forget the famous stat, but it's like 80% of change management efforts fail. And so, I agree with you that there is this real like socialware piece, as the folks at Orca would call it, that's really critical. And then, building the trustware piece, or sort of like what is the hardware that we're using to facilitate that socialware is really critical as well. There's definitely, I would say we are in this sort of nascent space of understanding what is the value of different jobs to be done inside a DAO. And there's obviously market factors that are a part of that too. There's a lot more people that have the skills and time and inclination right now to come manage a community than there are people that can write code and develop things. So they're going to be more in demand. But I think that's one of the interesting things about Coordinape is it allows for that conversation to happen within DAOs, because people are actually allocating that value to each other. And so then, we have a shared display where we can take a look at how the allocations were and then take a step back and say, hey, here's what we say we value. Here's how we're actually allocating that value. Where do these match up or not match up, or how do we need to do things differently here?
And so talking about Coordinate, want to give listeners a little bit of a brief as to the why behind Coordinate primarily, and yeah, what it does and what value it brings to people using it.
Yeah, I would say, the why is really pointing to what you were said earlier, is how do we get closer and closer to, value in equals value out? How do we make sure that people are rewarded for the value that they contribute? And how do we make sure that's on par with, the value that they're taking away? I don't think there'll ever be a perfectly fair system, but our ideas, can we make one that's, more human and more fair than, an HR department establishing salary bands and going through, this tryouts of a hiring process, which turns out it doesn't have that much bearing on whether someone's actually going to be successful or not. So the why behind Coordinape is that really, like, let's get as close as we can to value in, value out, and also, foster engagement and connection amongst the people in the DAO. We made some really deliberate design decisions in Coordinape to orient it around, gratitude and thanking people for the work that they've done, and really showing appreciation for people's contributions, and leaving people notes and letting them know, like, hey, I'm allocating to you, and here's why. Here's what I saw that you did that I really appreciated. Creates a nice foundational place to build culture from, of really recognizing people's contributions.
Yeah, I actually had read a few of them. Like, I hadn't really paid attention, and then I read a few messages, and like that was really great. Like, because I felt like I had been seen by people that I haven't really engaged with, but were part of my community. So yeah, I really love that feature. But speaking of like different types of features, is that you have different categories as well, that maybe you could provide a little bit more clarity around. And so it's like the epochs and then the circles as well. Could you explain kind of the reasoning behind it, but also like for listeners that don't know, could you explain a little bit about the epochs and the circles as well?
Sure. So yeah, Coordinape is organized into circles, and a circle is basically who are the people that you're trying to distribute some resource to. And so, that can be a large group or a small group. It really depends, but there's some budget or some resource you're trying to allocate to folks. So say that's like 1,000 of your native tokens. And so that's the circle. And then the epoch is really, what is the length of time that you're reviewing. So, are we looking back over the past month or the past week, or was this, a project sprint that lasted 6 weeks, and now we're going to, allocate the budget based on the whatever outcome that we created. And then people use give, which are points, and everyone has as a default 100 points. And you give points to people based on the value that they think that they added. So, I'll give 10 to this person and 20 to this person and 6 to this person, etc. And the total amount of give is equal to the total amount of resource or budget that you're trying to allocate. So in that circle, if I get 10% of all the give, that means I get 10% of those native tokens. So I would then have 100 tokens as compensation for that epoch.
Like, how do you usually see the circles being made? And are they done usually within like micropods or like a small groups of people in order for people to actually distribute their give to the people that they know have provided the output that is valuable to it? Or like, how have you seen give, sorry, not give, circles being used, mostly?
Yeah, I think that this is a question that a lot of people have, and we're sort of still seeing kind of different use cases and best practices emerge as different DAOs use it. I think broadly speaking, what we see is that circles work best when they're smaller, kind of two pizza teams, 12 people or less, or larger, like more than 40 or 50 people. Because in the smaller team, obviously you have higher context on what everyone's been doing. And so it's more likely that you can do an accurate allocation from your perspective. And then in the larger ones, there's going to be people in that circle who I may not know or certainly can't really speak to what they've done. But in a circle that big, it doesn't feel bad to not allocate to people, right? I'm trusting that whoever knows what they're doing is allocating to them. I'm just going to allocate to those folks who I can speak to the value that they provided directly. Um, it gets a little confusing when you get into those circles where it's like, I know everyone and I kind of know what they've been doing. And it feels weird to give them zero, but it also feels weird to allocate to them because I'm not actually sure what they've done. And so one of the things we're thinking about a lot and that's coming up on our roadmap is how we can make nested circles and kind of have an org level view so that you can see all the different things people are doing and then sort of how resources will flow down. Because ultimately it all happens in, small working groups and small groups of collaborators that are working together. I think we know from all sorts of research that small teams are the best at shipping things. And so, we're thinking a lot about how can we support people in that circle design, so that, we're getting the right people in the right circles and making sure that, if a role kind of touches four circles, like how do you do that allocation so that it's fair, so they're not getting a full allocation across four circles. That's definitely something we're thinking about a lot and are working on solving, along with our users. And I guess the other thing, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying about there's sort of a mindset shift that needs to happen about working in DAOs. And part of that mindset shift is just really trusting the subjective, and saying like if everybody really allocates to those who they thought added a lot of value, there may be some, bumps along the way as we iterate and figure that out, but it really does end up being a more fair or more accurate snapshot of who's actually been contributing over that epic.
And just in reference to epics, like what I think that is like really cool is that if you miss one, like at Bankless DAO, we do it every month, then you still have the opportunity to catch on the next one. And so was that your kind of reasoning around the implementation of epics, or not reasoning, but was that an assumption of yours as well, that the way that these DAOs would actually use the epics were for shorter time periods rather than like quarterly or a year, to provide more people an opportunity to not only be compensated, but also to be recognized for the work that they do?
Yeah, I mean that's why epics are adjustable. People can make them for whatever period of time makes sense. We needed to have epics because there has to be some deadline for give allocation, right? There had to be some period where it's like, okay, we're doing this, and then it gets distributed, and then we have the amount, and we can always, change that. We can make some epics that are very short sprints, and others that are reviewing a longer period of time. But yeah, I mean, contribution in DAOs is fluid. Sometimes, there's going to be a bunch of work to do and people are sprinting during the season. And then a lot of DAOs now have kind of the off season, where they're sort of planning for the next cycle of things. And so, it makes sense to sort of have epics be flexible in how to match how people are actually contributing.
Yeah. And just again align with that contribution. So earlier on, when I joined DAOs like last year in the fall, in the bull market, like everybody was like, quit your job, go full-time DAO, quit your job, go full-time Web3, because it was pretty much like Christmas. Like grants committee was just like, you want tokens to do this project? Cool, 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 right? And then the bear market hit. And then that's when you started to get a lot of like tweets and chatters on Discord being like, you sold me this dream, and people's like drives were around these incentives and these compensations, right? It was like, well, in the fall, for the work that I was doing, depending on where you lived, of course, it's like I was able to sustain myself for a couple of these projects, and now I'm not. And so what we've been also rethinking or thinking about really at Bankless DAO is like our bank utility, right? Like we can't just look at it as like a thing that, people will liquidate into something else and kind of like live off of. There needs to be more than that. The same thing with like the work that I do in DAOs are obviously not the work that I would charge outside of DAOs, right? So you're providing services that have like a product market need that you can charge outside. But when you're working in DAOs, you're not paid the same, which is totally fine. And so it's like, what is it that drives you, right? And so for me, it's around like purpose and environment and an opportunity to grow. And those are kind of my incentives. But and so many of the DAOs right now are they're like, okay, well, maybe we're not getting enough work done or getting our active contributors because of lack of value alignment. And so I don't necessarily think that it's value alignment, but I think that there are other tangible benefits of working in DAOs that we could definitely highlight. And so I was just kind of curious in terms of like, what sort of incentives can people have that can be tangible that are outside of like salaries or financial compensation in DAOs. Also knowing that like, you've worked in like a close knit like organization at Converge and then like also in DAOs too. So just kind of want to lean on from those experiences as well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, there's many forms of currency and getting paid is one, and obviously a really important one. But I think working in Web3 is a huge advantage because you're sort of you're learning what the future is going to be like. You're learning a lot of really important skills about asynchronous collaboration and non-hierarchical decision making and participating in all of these like messy, frustrating processes of coming to consensus and how the groups make decisions. I mean, these are actually like really fundamental and critical skills for the coming decades, because the pace of change is going to continue to accelerate. And so being able to navigate ambiguity, for example, I think is like one of the most important skills that someone can learn. And as we know, a DAO is a great training ground for that. I think at the MCon conference that's coming up, we're going to be talking on a panel about compensation in DAOs. But one of the fundamental questions is sort of like, are DAOs for everybody? Especially in their sort of nascent evolution right now, they're not a great fit for everybody, and that's for better and for worse. But there really does, I feel like, require an entrepreneurial mindset. There's definitely a mindset shift of you show up to a job and you're like, tell me what to do, and your manager says like, here's your numbers and here's how we're going to measure your success, and you go produce this. You show up at a DAO, you say, what do I do? And you're like, what do you want to do? And then does that align to what the DAO needs? But there's a lot more sort of sovereignty and responsibility that you have to take on. And that's why, when people are like, how do I get involved in DAOs? I'm always like, find a DAO that really resonates with you, that's trying to do something that you want to see happen in the world, because you'll have a lot more ideas about how to contribute. But yeah, I guess that's the answer is that I feel like there's a lot of really, I guess you could call them intangible benefits, but I think like there's no better training program for being able to navigate the future that's coming than a DAO. It teaches some of these really fundamental core skills to navigating uncertainty.
I think that the value that DAOs have really brought me was the agility to be able to do the work that I haven't been able to do in my like IRL life, right? Like nobody in DAOs tells you to stay in your lane. So like I can work on projects that have to do with like research, or I can work on projects that have to do with production or governance or whatever, like because I have the capacity to do that. And I feel that like for polygotes or like people who are just like interested in many things or are good at many things, like DAOs are a great place to play, but it also provides you an opportunity to professionally grow in those areas and learn from one another as well. And I think that that is like the biggest value. And that was the kind of the mindset that I had come the second time of exploring DAOs. Because the first time I was like that, I was like, oh, like, what do I do? I really like this and it sounds like a great idea, but where do I fit in? And you know, I kind of had enough confidence in myself of when it wasn't working, I would just leave and join another DAO. It's fine. Like just leave and like, you know, and then you can join another DAO in terms of Discord and see where you fit in. Because I think that that's the questions that people kind of have to ask themselves before even going into a particular DAO. It's like what are the values or the purpose or the mission that I align with when I'm in this DAO? Like how can I be like what kind of skill sets do they need? How can I be valuable? In what areas can I actually learn? And so I think that like being a little bit intentional about it, like you know, you can actually be yeah, much more not calculated, but much more informed as to whether or not this is right for you. Because I think that the ones in DAOs that strive are that entrepreneurial spirit, you know, the types of person that can go from one project or the other or is really agile. And, you know, as we attempt to kind of onboard the masses of this is the new way of working, I think that you know we kind of have to highlight, and this is why is the inspiration of this podcast or video cast, is that I wanted to show the like how people can leverage the skill sets that they already have or the experiences that they have to actually like work in this space. And so like I'm hoping that those types of narratives are stronger than the quit your 9 to 5 work full time DAO, because I think we're still in this experimental phase, and I think that we need to give ourselves some space to kind of experiment around this human coordination and efficiency around projects and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I always say this to our team, and I think it's important for all of us in Web3 to recognize, like, what we're doing is really hard. Like, the degree of difficulty is extremely high. We're trying to collaborate, which, as you know, it's hard to collaborate with people you like on a project in real life. It's still hard. So trying to do it with people, you know, across languages and cultures all over the globe asynchronously, like this is not easy. But it's also, you know, the work to be done sort of the next few generations, to really figure out how we're going to handle a lot of the change that's coming. So yeah, I think it really speaks to that mindset piece, you know, of the difference between you know, hey, should I make this tool to help people allocate, or like, hey, we made this tool, like, do you want to try it? Is it valuable? Right? There's a real switch there that is right now. I think that the big difference in DAOs is you come to a job and say, tell me what you need me to do, as opposed to a DAO which is like, here's what I want to do. You know, where does it fit here? That's a real big switch. And that was another one of the inspirations around Coordinape, is it sort of removes that, you know, it's an ability to, people can enter a community circle and there's budget there, you know, for things to get allocated, and you can try something, and if people like it, you can get paid for it, you know, right away. If it is adding value. If it's not, then you won't get paid as much, and it's time to kind of go back to the drawing board and say, like, let's see, was what I did not a fit? Was it that the DAO isn't the right fit for it? And kind of solve your way that way. And I mean, obviously, you know, there's a huge privilege in having the decision whether you're going to do that or not. You know, to say, like, I'm willing to build something that I might not get paid for, and you know, that's something we need to solve for, obviously, in DAOs, and it's kind of where we are right now, as you were alluding to, in this really nascent stage. You know, people have to really be excited and want to contribute, which I think is both a bug and a feature right now where we're at.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think has been your kind of greatest mind shift in working in DAOs? I mean, for me, I guess to begin is that once I started, we all work anonymously, and then once I like started to meet people, um, I started to ask myself, like, if we met in real life, like, would we have been able to work so well because of obviously like my unconscious biases as well, or just like and usually in most circumstances, like when people work or collaborate on a project, it's like, here was my portfolio, and so it's like, oh, here's some sort of validity, but there's a huge level of trust, right? And that trust isn't just based on the individual, it's based on me being in this particular DAO and the reputation of the DAO that it has. And obviously like in line with that is that the reputation of the contributors are aligned with that particular DAO. And so those are some like interesting kind of unlearnings or learnings for myself and working in DAOs. And what has been kind of some of your surprising learnings or unlearnings in working in DAOs or working with people in DAOs?
I mean, given that I spent so long working sort of with in the context of Converge, it was really, I think, one of the most surprising things to me was that despite all the layers of technology, like the fundamental issues around collaboration are the same, right? People want to feel seen and appreciated, and there's also a level of competence and execution that's required. So there's always this balance of like connection and competence, and everyone's kind of striving for those things. I think what's really interesting about DAOs to me, or one of the many interesting things, is that companies a lot of times get created to solve a particular problem and make money doing it. Right? They see a need, and it's like, okay, here's the market opportunity, and that can be also really it can be motivated by like an altruistic idea, but it's really like a company. It's like, here's the need, here's the product market fit. We're going to go do this. Whereas DAOs are more like, a lot of them sort of formed as like a bat signal, of, hey, here's a cool idea, or this is a vibe, and then sort of people show up, and you have a bunch of values aligned people that are like, okay, so what are we doing here? We have to actually do something. What is it? And let's find our way. And then you add sort of the bull market hype to that, and you really do have a community with a bank account trying to figure out what to do with it. And now I think we're seeing like, oh yeah, vibes are necessary but not sufficient, and really honing in on like what that purpose and what is it that we want to do. I think what we're going to see is more DAOs will have more structure in order to get things done. But I hope, and I think they'll continue to grow because they'll retain that spirit of, there are people that have a certain value set and a certain worldview, right, that they occupy, that for them it makes sense. Like, yes, more open collaboration, the fact that we can all share more equitably in the outcomes that we're collectively producing. The power of token to have collective and shared ownership. It really, it puts a lot more pressure on, to make everyone an owner. And it also unlocks a ton of opportunity.
So just one last question is that what piece of advice would you give for people who want to enter the Web3 space or the DAO space?
I would say, my advice on a lot of things is go slow to go fast. I think that just simple drop in, it's easy to drop in on a Discord and just kind of see what the vibe is and what people are working on or what they're into. And I think more and more there's going to be, and there already are, there's a long tail of DAOs for whatever you're interested in. I think the rise of impact DAOs is going to be really powerful too, where you're going to have these hybrid sort of activist, nonprofit, for-profit, collectives and movements that are going to take the shape of DAOs. So, I would say start with what you're interested in. Start with what really ignites your curiosity, and then you'll find your way to some Web3 community who's thinking about and working on the same things. And then don't quit your job. You'll know when it's time to quit your job, or maybe do. I don't know. I guess that depends. Maybe it's you jump in and learn to swim is kind of one way of going about things, and another one is really taking it slow and find that community, contribute. See what it's like to work with a bunch of internet strangers, and like how amazing it is when you ship something and how good it feels, and then um, you know do it some more. Go try it at a different DAO. There's really there's this movement isn't going anywhere. This industry isn't going anywhere. It's only going to grow. So there's time. So I would say really take your time, learn the ins and outs of things, and just follow. Don't follow your bliss. Follow like where your curiosity is, and then also where those practical needs are that fit your skill sets.
Thank you. Well said. Thanks so much for your time, Zach. We're at the end of the interview. How do people learn more about Coordinape and you? Any socials to share?
Sure. We're Coordinape on Twitter, and coordinape.com is our site. Easy to find our Discord there. We've got a very active community. Happy to share anything and everything there. You can find me on Twitter at Fifth World Zack. And look forward to connecting with anyone and everyone who has questions about Web3 and getting paid in Web3.
Awesome. Thanks again, Zach, for your time.